There is a Viking home design so effective, so thermally advanced, and so overlooked that honestly modern engineers still struggle to match it using industrial insulation. This was no romantic longhouse smothered by icy winds. It was an Arctic-ready dwelling built by people who understood cold, not from theory, but from bitter daily survival. These structures kept families warm in climates where, modern cabins would freeze solid without constant fuel. Some were so well designed that traces of warmth retention remain measurable even centuries after abandonment. What makes this truly astonishing is that the Vikings built these shelters with nothing but sod, timber, stone, and a working knowledge of Earth's natural thermal cycles. And in this episode of In the Beginning, we're unpacking exactly how these Arctic homes worked, why they outperformed many modern insulation systems, and how their principles can still guide practical construction today for anyone living in cold regions or preparing for off-grid resilience. The Arctic-ready Viking home relied on a concept modern engineers categorize as multi-layered thermal mass insulation. The Vikings didn't call it that. They simply understood that warmth doesn't come from trapping heat in thin walls. Warmth comes from preventing heat from escaping in the first place. Sod houses formed the backbone of this approach. Thick blocks of turf were cut from living root mats, stacked like bricks, and then reinforced with timber or stone to prevent collapse. The sod alone created a dense thermal barrier far thicker than almost any modern residential wall. Add to that the natural moisture of the sod, which, froze in winter and became a hard, ice-reinforced shell that stopped cold air infiltration entirely. In other words, the colder it got, the stronger the insulation became. Modern insulation loses efficiency as temperatures drop. Viking sod walls did the opposite. The core design advantage came from combining earth sheltering with compact geometry. Rather than building tall walls exposed to Arctic winds, Vikings built low-profile dwellings half-buried into the ground. The interior was laid out long and narrow, minimizing surface area and maximizing heat retention. The soil surrounding the home functioned as a massive thermal mass that absorbed heat slowly and released it just as slowly, smoothing out temperature swings. Even when outside temperatures fell to deadly lows, the ground beneath and around the home remained relatively stable. This created a thermal envelope long before the phrase ever entered engineering vocabulary. The roof was the true masterpiece of Viking Arctic engineering. Built from thick timbers covered with birch bark and then more sod, it formed a continuous insulating cap over the entire structure. The birch bark layer served as both a waterproof membrane and a vapor barrier. Above it, the sod, often more than a foot thick, added both weight and insulation. The mass of the sod roof prevented heat from rising and escaping. At the same time, it added acoustic dampening and wind protection. Archaeological reconstructions show that interior heat loss through sod roofs was dramatically lower than through timber roofs in similar climates. A modern parallel is the green roof, but honestly, most modern versions lack the sheer thickness and density that made the Viking version so effective. Vikings didn't heat these homes by flooding them with fire. They heated them by minimizing heat loss so that only a small fire was needed to maintain warmth. Central hearths provided steady, radiant heat. Some homes used stone benches or platforms that absorbed warmth from the fire and released it slowly over time. Entrances were strategically placed low and angled to avoid wind exposure. Some designs incorporated a small entry chamber acting as an airlock, preventing cold air from rushing inside every time someone entered. Every detail pointed toward heat conservation, not heat production. This is why, even with primitive fuel sources, the homes remained warm throughout long winters. The reason Viking Arctic homes outperform modern insulation isn't magical nostalgia, it's physics. Modern insulation depends on air pockets inside lightweight materials like fiberglass or foam. But these materials are vulnerable to compression, moisture and temperature loss extremes. Sod and earth insulation, on the other hand, rely on mass. Heavy, dense materials hold heat far longer and are unaffected by extreme cold. A sod wall can exceed 60 centimeters in thickness, surpassing modern building code requirements by a wide margin. Thermal mass retains heat overnight, stabilizes interior temperature, and resists wind infiltration in ways light materials cannot replicate. A modern builder or off-grid homesteader can adapt Viking principles without recreating a museum piece. The first step is using earth berming to cover at least one side of a structure. Even in a temperate climate, covering a wall with a meter of earth drastically improves heat retention. A sod roof can still be built today by laying a modern waterproof membrane, followed by soil layers seeded with grass. This not only adds thermal mass, but also regulates moisture and protects the roof surface from UV damage. For survival shelters, the concepts translate into building partially underground, reinforcing with logs or stone, and using soil as the primary insulation. A simple step-by-step adaptation is digging into a hillside, framing the interior with timber, laying a waterproof layer, and then covering the structure with as much earth as possible. The result is a shelter that requires minimal heating even in harsh conditions. The Viking Arctic home stands as one of history's greatest examples of climate-smart engineering. Practical, durable, and centuries ahead of its time. These homes didn't fight the cold, they outsmarted it. For anyone fascinated by ancient resilience, survival architecture, or the forgotten wisdom of early northern cultures, this knowledge is a reminder that the past still has lessons waiting. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient engineering, make sure you subscribe to In the Beginning and share this episode so more history enthusiasts can rediscover these powerful, time-tested building techniques.